All right. Welcome to the Introduction to Trauma and Resilience. I am Jennifer Kell. I'm the Executive Director of Robin's Hope, and I am joined today by Tanya Jones, MSW here at Robin's Hope.
Hello all. So the learning objectives today will be to understand why trauma matters, understand the impact of trauma on brain development and behavior, understand ACEs and their impact on our risk health behaviors, understand how to help those impacted by trauma, and understand the importance of resilience and ways to build it.
Because we are talking about trauma today, there are parts of our presentation which may be activating for some people. So we definitely encourage people to look at self-care first. Make sure you take breaks, use grounding exercises as needed, get a sensory object, something that's either soft and fuzzy or that helps ground you to the here and now and calm you when needed. Be able to go ahead and pause this video if you need to. That's perfectly fine. We will be here waiting when you're ready. Thanks so much.
Grounding or regulating. This is called the window of tolerance. So particularly you would like to be in where it's happy, excited, or calm. If you move over to frustrated or angry, that means you're heightened, experiencing anxiety, difficulty focusing. You may have some rapid speech. If we go on to the other side where you're sad, tired, or upset, you may be disassociating, which means disconnecting from your own thoughts, feelings, memories, or sense of identity. That state of arousal or stimulation in which you are able to function or thrive in everyday life is more if you are in the calm, happy, or excited.
And we'll be talking a lot more as we go through the day on how to get grounded and stay connected. But one exercise we can throw at you right now is this 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 exercise, where you start by looking around the room and just noting 5 things that you can see. Like, for example, I am currently staring at a computer screen. I can see a computer screen. I can see a desk phone. I've got a window to my left. There's pictures on the walls. So I can see a lot of things. I want to think about what are 5 of those things that I can see, and then go to using my sense of touch. What are 4 things that I can touch? I can touch the desk. I can touch the chair that I'm sitting on. I can touch my clothing. I can touch the phone that's sitting on the desk as well. Then moving to 3 things that I can hear, which may be a little bit more challenging. I might have to quiet down. There's not very many people in the office this morning, so there's not too much activity in the building. But if I'm real quiet, I can hear the cars going by on the road outside. I can hear the air conditioner when it kicks on, and I can hear if there is somebody else that enters the building. 2 things that I can smell. I tend to always be stuffy, and it is pollen season, so smelling might be difficult, but if I turn on my little wax melter, I get a smell of peppermint. And thankfully there's no malodorous things going on this morning. So it smells kind of blah in here at the moment. And then one thing I can taste, if you have a piece of candy or something nearby that you can taste, you can focus on that. If you don't have anything nearby for taste, then you can substitute one thing you're grateful for in that one. And just think about what are things that bring you happiness and what are things you're thankful for in your life. It can be little things like I'm grateful that it wasn't raining this morning, so that I didn't have to grab rain gear on my way out the house. Another grounding exercise is deep breathing. So as quick as looking at your hand, you can breathe in while you trace up the finger and then out as you breathe, as you trace down the finger. In and out. And of course you want to go a little slow with this. And in and out. In and out. In and out. And by the time you've done all of that, you've gotten some decent relaxation. And it looks like the computer has seen me tracing my hand as putting my hand in the air. So I'm seeing that in my little screen right now. That's kind of humorous. Um, so do whatever you need to do to keep yourself regulated while we go through this training. Most of the stuff is pretty innocuous, but you never know what might set things off. So just to be prepared.
So trauma is anything that overwhelms your ability to cope. So it could deeply distressing or disturbing experiences. An event or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening and has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and well-being.
So a couple more ways of looking at trauma. These are pulled from some of the leading trauma researchers in our field. The first is Gabor Mate, who says that trauma isn't what happens to you, it's what happens inside of you. And that's really looking at how we respond is the difference between what is a trauma that sticks and causes problems for us versus the actual event itself. Bessel van der Kolk says trauma is when we are not seen and known. And that one's really powerful for me because it really talks about the isolation of that trauma brings, where you feel like nobody gets it, nobody understands you. You might hear things like people saying, just get over it. It happened a long time ago. And knowing that you just can't, and that's normal and typical. So Bessel's comment really looks at that need for connection to mitigate the traumatic response. Looking at some more things about trauma. Let's see, trauma is widespread, it's harmful, and is a costly public health problem. As we'll see a little later, almost everyone has experienced one traumatic event in their life. And now post-pandemic, all of us have been through a traumatic event. Whether or not we were traumatized by it really has to do a lot more with what are our coping skills and the overall impact of that event, because it was a little different in everybody's experience. Trauma has no regard for age, gender, socioeconomic status, substance use disorders, race, ethnicity, geography, or sexual orientation. Trauma can happen to anyone, anywhere, at any time. It is an almost universal experience of people with mental health and substance use disorders. The need to address trauma is increasingly viewed as an important component of effective behavioral health service delivery. So for those of us who specialize in trauma care, this is a really nice awareness building in our communities that to fully address any behavioral health issue, you really do need to address the trauma piece of that as well, because trauma really either creates the mental health or behavioral health issue, or it becomes part of the experience because of that pre-existing mental health or substance use disorder.
Traumatic events can include some of the following: sexual violence, physical violence, psychological, social violence, and verbal violence. So you can see in the diagram, some of them do overlap. And some examples of childhood sexual abuse, physical, emotional abuse, neglect or abandonment, rape, sexual assault, trafficking, domestic violence, experiencing or witnessing other violent crimes, catastrophic injury or illness, death, loss, or grief, institutional abuse or neglect. Examples, schools, prisons, medical, psychiatric, or spiritual, war, terrorism, community and school violence, bullying, cultural dislocation or sudden loss, hysterical, generational, targeted violence, chronic stresses like racism or poverty, natural disasters, invasive medical procedures, or any misuse of power for one person over another. So I'll piggyback off of Ms. Kell example again. Everyone experienced COVID with the pandemic. So we all have had some experience with trauma.
So sometimes you'll hear people refer to big T and little t traumas. And that's just a way that helps our brains categorize. There's nothing official about that. But big T traumas are things that everyone would recognize as a traumatic event. Like if that happened to any human being, there would be some traumatic fallout from it. And that would be things like natural disasters, war, rape, abuse, other events that lead to serious bodily injury, and that are traumatic with just one event. Um, in earlier diagnostic manuals, that was all that was considered to lead to PTSD as a diagnosis. Now our diagnostic criteria has broadened to recognize that little t traumas and other types of trauma can lead to PTSD conditions. So little t traumas would be things like nasty comments, social rejection, a car accident with no injuries, things that are not traumatic after one event, but with repetition become traumatic. And with that, I think about like a mosquito bite. You get a mosquito bite, it's annoying, it's itchy, but it's not a huge deal. But if you were experiencing mosquito bites all over your body every day, and you were covered from head to toe with mosquito bites, this would now be a medical problem. And the little t traumas are like that. One thing is a little, it's annoying, it's not huge, but when it happens every day, it becomes overwhelming. So when you think about social rejection, right? If you go to work and somebody says something nasty to you can brush that off pretty easily, usually. But if they say something nasty to you every day and they start talking about you in the peer group, and suddenly everybody goes to lunch as a group, except they don't invite you, now you're feeling very isolated, very withdrawn. That's going to really start to have an impact. So that's what we're talking about with little t traumas. It's those little things that build up over time. Trauma is very individualistic. No two people are going to experience the same event the same. That's Gabor Mate likes to say no two people have the same parents, because each child has their own experience. It pulls out different emotions from the parent. So, and they're born at different times typically, unless you're twins, but even then, you pull out different things from your parents. So you don't have the same experience, even growing up in the same household. But in this example that I've given, got 4 people are in a car accident. The driver falls into depression and sees visions of an oncoming car every time he tries to fall asleep. The passenger in the front seat struggles with panic attacks and has started to isolate and avoids leaving the house. The couple in the back, however, seem to have no negative impacts. They have a strong supportive relationship and enjoy spending time with their adult children and grandchildren and are active in their faith community. So this really kind of shows that we can have the same event, the car accident, but we can have really different responses to it. And some of that is based on our different experience. The person driving the car may have seen the collision coming. They may have felt more empowered to try to avoid it, but also more responsible for the well-being of the other passengers. The person in the passenger seat may also have been more aware, may have seen it coming, but felt powerless to do anything about it. The couple in the back seat, we have a little bit more information about them, and we see that they have strong supports socially, both in their faith community and with their family. And what we know about that is that those connections with each other are the biggest resilient skill that we have. So they are already less likely to be traumatized just because they have a lot of supports going on in their life already. But then they also have that different experience. They were in the back seat. They may not have been seeing the collision coming. They have everything kind of impacts differently. The second example I have about this individualistic response is a routine surgery. So for me as an adult, if I were to go in and have to have a outpatient procedure done, that I have this understanding that I'm going to go in, I'll probably be sedated. Doctors will do what they're going to do. I'll be told of the risks. I'll understand that. I'll wake up and then I'll be going home that same day. It's not really a traumatic experience for me at all, unless something goes tragically wrong, right? But for a little child may not understand fully what's happening. They might be scared by having people in masks and the surgical garb looming over them. They might not understand that they're going to be put to sleep and then wake up. They may feel like that's very scary, and they may be even dying. Yeah, so for a child, this might be a very overwhelming traumatic experience. Even though medicine has come a long way since when I was a kid, and they do a lot more to really attend to what is the child's experience and to try to make that less traumatic for them. You still have kid brains, right? So I think of a story where I heard that a small child was asked if he would be willing to give a liver transplant to save his sibling's life. And the parents thought that they did everything to help the child understand that, it would be a surgery and it would be painful, but it would help his sister or whatever. And when they were going into surgery, the child was like, "It's okay, mommy, I'm ready to die. It's good that my sister will live." And the shock and horror of thinking this poor child thought he was going to die in order to save his sister. That's traumatic, but the parents did their best to prepare him to not think that way. But you never know how things are going to get perceived. So be aware that even if you've been in an environment that was not personally traumatic to you, that doesn't mean that it wasn't traumatic to other people that you know.
Impact of trauma on brain development. The brain develops what it needs to survive. Pathways used frequently get stronger and pathways not used get weaker. The brain is uniquely designed to survive the world the child lives in. Neuroplasticity is the ability to recognize synaptic connections, learning experiences, or injury. So the survival brain develops first, then emotional, and then the thinking brain. 90% of a child's brain is developed by the age of 5. The cortex is under construction through the ages 25 to 27. The cortex is essential functions of the brain where it has memory, thinking, learning, reasoning, problem solving, and emotion. If a child lives in a regular state of fear, pathways used for safety and survival are used constantly. These pathways strengthen. The rational or logical pathways of the brains aren't used as much, so they weaken. The primitive downstairs brain is intact at birth. The sophisticated upstairs brain is under construction during childhood and adolescence. Trauma impacts brain development, so the higher functions, executive functions, don't develop as they should. The brains continue to develop, but not like it is supposed to. It is like building a house on sand and missing bricks in the foundation. So the cortex is essential functions of the brain for memory, thinking, learning, reasoning, problem solving, and emotion.
This slide takes a look at the neurons. Oops, this slide needs to go backwards. All right. So this is looking at the neuronal connections. And what you see in the top one is a brain where it's really robust connections. There's a lot of associations. There's a lot of wiring available in that brain. And that's what happens when we have a healthy, stimulating environment. We have a lot of associations that get made and a lot of pathways that develop in our brain. When we are, when we are in a more neglectful environment, we might not have as much stimulation. We're going to have fewer connections, and our brain's going to look like that slide on the bottom with a little less things going on. There's a saying, what fires together, wires together. So the more often that we have a specific thought, just like walking through a path in the forest, the more often we use it, the stronger that attachment grows, the harder it is to disconnect. When we don't use it, it tends to get pruned, right? So those attachments will decay, and the association will disappear. So when you think about like language development, right? If you took a second language in school, like all of us had to graduate high school, you learned it. I know I learned. I had a second language that I knew very, very well and was pretty fluent in high school and then early college. But I haven't used it. I haven't gone to any countries that speak that language. And now, many decades later, I don't have that knowledge. Those connections have disintegrated. I would have to spend some time relearning in order to get fluent again. It might not take as long. Some of those connections are still there, but it's not where it needs to be fluent.
So this is an example of the brain. So these are the brains of two 3-year-old children that were in an orphanage, in a Romanian orphanage, who suffered severe sensory deprivation. The right brain is smaller and has enlarged ventricle holes. Um, it is also shrunken cortex of the brain's outer layer. So PTS studies show victims of childhood abuse and combat veterans experience physical changes in hippocampus, a part of the brain involved in learning and memory, as well as handling of stress. So the most alarming facts in this study was the effects of the child abuse and neglect can have on brain development. So maltreatment can negatively impact the brain and the brain responsible for thinking, planning, reasoning, and decision making. So severe neglect with minimal exposure to language, touch, and social interactions can cause delays in the development. Throughout the process of language, it can also cause the brain to be visibly smaller in children that experiences extreme neglect. So in addition to that, abuse and neglect can negatively impact the part of the brain that regulates anxiety and fear. All of these vital functions influence physical and mental health, as well as academic and social aspects of a person's life.
Now, the positives part of this is that our brains have been found to be very plastic, which means that they can redevelop. And so early childhood neglect and abuse may cause the brain on the right-hand side, but it doesn't mean that it will always stay there. There is the impact of healing and that neuroplasticity, which will help to bring that back to even. So we don't want to make the mistake of saying that somebody who has experienced extreme trauma is always going to be impaired. This slide takes a little look at the neurobiology of trauma and the hand model of the brain. We're going to get into a little bit of the newer science, which has kind of replaced this triune model of the brain, but still handy for thinking about. So I'm going to teach it a little bit, but then also know that it's not exactly accurate. So the triune model of the brain says that we bring in information through our brainstem, which is like our palm. All of that sensory information from the outside world comes in and gets processed through the most primitive areas of our brain. And then it goes into our limbic system or our reptilian brain. And this is where our emotions were said to be processed and where our fight-flight systems would live. And then the information would come up to our neocortex, which is where we do our logical linear thinking. It's where we know what came first, what came second. It's where we can speak. Our language centers are in that area. And we do our what they call executive functioning, where we can order and make sense of our world. When all is well, our brain is all talking together. Your thumb is touching your fingers, it's touching the back of your hand. Everything's communicating together and all is good. when something traumatic comes in, or a memory that sets off the traumatic network, it would come in, it would light up your fight flight systems, your emergency system would kick on, and boom, you would flip your lid. All of your logical linear thinking kind of does not get enough blood flow, and that it's focused on those survival pathways. So this becomes a really handy way to think about, oh, I flipped my lid, I'm activated, I'm down here, I'm not going to be able to use all of those lovely coping skills that I thought about because now I'm in survival mode. The only things I can really focus on at this point are trying to get myself safe again. So we do things like deep breathing and grounding exercises, things that don't take a whole lot of thought, but just help me be in my feelings and bring my body back to center. Now, with additional research, we found that it's not really this triune model where there's safety and then connection and then thinking. Now we know it's more of a predictive brain model where some of that stuff is happening in all areas of the brain. And it's working just a little bit more complexly than we initially thought. So our current understanding of the brain science shows us that what happens is that the first thing that happens is there's an event in the environment. Say we see a bear, right? So there's sensory input. Now, I'm going to make some predictions based on seeing that bear. What am I going to predict? Well, if I'm at a zoo and he's in a cage or in an enclosure, that's probably not going to be a threat, right? So I'm not going to make a threat prediction in that state for me. But if I see a bear and I'm out walking in a trail, I'm going to now have a statistical prediction that this is a dangerous situation. And once I've said that this is a dangerous situation, I'm going to experience unbalanced interoception. And what that really means is that my emotions are going to go, oh no, this is not good, right? I'm going to have some discontent going on in my being. And those emotions then will kick off the fight, flight, freeze, fawn response. So now I'm activated, right? I'm activated, I'm panicking, I'm getting a dump of neurochemicals into my bloodstream. I'm getting the cortisol and adrenaline. And all of that stuff is great for fighting or fleeing, right? It helps me to escape the trauma, to escape this threat. I'm gonna either think I need to go slowly, something's going to happen, I'm going to freeze if that's the safest thing for me. My brain's going to make those decisions for me. It's not going to be conscious thought. I'm just going to go into action. All of that is going to take a lot of energy. And at the end of that event, I'm going to be left tired and drained, right? The adrenaline kicks in, gives me a burst of energy. But as the adrenaline comes out, I'm left tired and exhausted. And it's going to make me hypersensitive to bear sightings. All right. So depending on how this event turns out, if this bear takes a swipe at me, if I get injured, I'm going to be now more likely to decide when I see a bear that it's an unsafe environment. And that loop is going to be strengthened. Now, on the other hand, that whole cycle works the same when we see safe things as well, right? So in that situation, the sensory input would come in and maybe it's the same, I see a bear. Well, maybe this bear is a teddy bear and it's a teddy bear that has been mine since I was an infant. And my statistical prediction when I see this sensory input is, Oh, I love my bear, and it makes me feel warm and love, right? So my balanced interoception, I'm feeling the warm fuzzies. I'm remembering being loved and cared for. Maybe my grandma got me that bear, and it's very special to me because I remember grandma and grandma's love. Um, this safety prediction is going to kick off the neurochemicals of connection and engagement. So I'm getting a dump of dopamine and oxytocin and a couple other things that lead me to connect with people and to feel safe and steady in my body. When the event is over, I'm going to feel energized, right? All of those neurochemicals that came in give me energy, they give me connection, they give me reward feeling. So I'm going to feel happy and alive. And then it helps prediction correction. So in this one, it's a teddy bear. There was no ever a threat with teddy bear, but had there been, maybe this was um, maybe it was a dog, right? And I had been attacked by a dog as a young child and feared dogs. But now I have this puppy that came into my life and I have this cycle of safety. So that helps me correct the prediction so that now when I see a dog, I'm less likely to think danger and I'm more likely to think, well, it might be a cute little puppy. And so now I've got a safety prediction. So this is where we are with things that are not threats for us and where we want to be to know that we've healed our trauma is being able to more accurately predict safety from danger when we become oversensitized because of a traumatic event.
So which animal are you? These are the faint, freeze, flight, and fight responses. So the possum represents the faint, hence plain possum. So the faint is to please someone or to avoid conflict. The gazelle represents, well, excuse me, the deer represents freeze, hence the deer in headlights. So it's an ability to move or to act against a threat. The gazelle represents flight. Flight is you run away from danger or the threat. And then fight is the lion. So they face a perceived danger or threat. So I am the lion. I tend to kind of take the threat head on. So you could always type in the chat and see which one that you are. So there's two responses from the nervous system. There's a parasympathetic, which is the all clear control body response, or there is a sympathetic, which is the anxious, strenuous physical activity from the executive functions, depending on which response you have. And then the next slide will continue to talk about the fight. Oh, the fainting goats. About the fainting goats. So the fainting goats, they faint or fall over when they're excited or startled, and it's a hereditary component that they have. So they're more like the possum playing dead.
And they're just plain funny.
Yeah, they're not actually passed away.
It's okay, Boo. It's okay, Boo. Go ahead. Let's get Boo out.
on, buddy. Scoot. And there he goes. Okay, bud. Shake it off. You can do it. Up you go. Good job. And now he can go eat. You're welcome.
Alrighty. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's actually 6 responses to that emergency response system getting activated. The first is the one we all know about, the fight flight system, and that is a sympathetic response. That's when we get that first burst of danger. It kicks in the adrenaline and we have that instinctive fight flight response. And then typically if it's like a startle, right? I see a wiggly black stick on the sidewalk, I get into that fight flight, but then I look and I go, oh, it's just a stick, right? My parasympathetic system kicks in and it brings me back to a rest zone. But if there's still danger, if it's not just a stick, it's a snake and I'm afraid it's venomous, right? Then I'm in fight flight and my parasympathetic has kicked off to try to bring me back down. But it's like hitting the gas pedal and the brake at the same time. Things kind of lock up. So that might put me into a freeze state. And that's a biochemical response. It's not something I choose. It's something that happens because my body is trying to keep me safe. If the parasympathetic continues to drive, but the danger is still not over, it will throw me into a faint response, that possum playing dead kind of thing. It's a dorsal vagal response where that parasympathetic kind of overshoots and it pulls you into a state where your respiration shallow out, your heart rhythm slow, your body is basically preparing to die. And so it's looking like it's feigning death. That can cause you to become unconscious, and it can cause you to look as if you are having a medical emergency and or actually dying. So that doesn't happen to everybody, but it's a definite response. That might also, the faint response might also be a dissociation where you feel like you just shut down and you go inside, and you become less aware or unaware of what's going on around you in the external world. And then we have fawn, which is more a sympathetic response. It's more before your fight flight gets kicked up, you starting to feel like there's some danger here, and you're appeasing the person. You're trying to keep them from blowing their top. You're trying to bring down that threat level. Like, this person's agitated. Let me get them calm again. What do I need to do? A final one that has been identified is crying for help and trying to attach. And when you think of like a young child or a toddler, when they feel scared, the first thing that they do is they start looking for their caregiver. Where's my mom or dad? Who's that person that takes care of me? And I want to run to them and get hugs and comfort. So that response, crying for help and seeking to attach, is something that we can still do as adults. But we typically, when we think about it, at least for me, what comes to mind is a small child.
So types of adverse events. There's 3 realms of the ACEs. So adverse childhood and community experiences, which is the ACEs, can occur in households, community, or in the environment and can cause toxic stress. So left unaddressed, toxic stress from ACEs harms children and families, organization systems, and communities, and reduces the ability of individuals, entities to respond to stressful events with resiliency. So 3 types of the household, community, and environment. So just some examples in the household are divorce, homelessness, alcoholism or drug abuse, domestic violence. Some things that could be happening in the community are food scarcity, a lack of social capital and mobility, discrimination, poor housing quality and affordability. And then some things that are happening in the environment can be a climate crisis, record storms and flooding, mudslides, earthquakes, pandemic that we've all experienced. So when things are happening in the household for an individual, they can affect the community, which also can affect the environment. And then it kind of can go the other way too. Things that are happening in the environment can affect someone in their household and can affect the community. So kind of like gun violence being in the community can affect individuals in the environment. Be living in a food desert can affect individuals and also can affect the environment. So kind of can go 1, 2, or 3, or can 3, 2, 1. So it can kind of go in a different realm, but those are the 3 realms of the ACEs. ACEs study. So Albert's Childhood Experience Questionnaire, you can go online and find it. I will read a couple of questions. For each question that applies to you, you enter a 1 for yes. At the end, you will tally up all of the questions. If you have 10, then you are more apt to have some issues or concerns in adulthood. Most people have at least 1 ACE. So I will read the first 3. Did a parent or other adult in the household often swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you, or act in a way that made you afraid that you might be physically hurt? 2, did a parent or other adult in the household often push, grab, slap, or throw something at you, or ever hit you so hard you had marks or were injured? 3, did an adult person at least 5 years old or older ever touch or fondle you, or have you or touch your body in any sexual way, or try to actually have oral, anal, or vaginal sex with you? And 4, did you often feel no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special, or your family didn't look out for each other or feel close to each other or support each other?
So that checklist was developed by some doctors that were working with Kaiser Permanente and in conjunction with the CDC to look at how childhood traumatic events impact later adult health experiences. So it's not meant to be exhaustive of all types of trauma. It was just a quick survey that they could take to look at how it correlated with heart disease, lung disease, asthma, substance use disorders, depression, anxiety, childhood, teen pregnancy kind of thing, smoking. Like they studied a lot of conditions. And before that study was done in the early to mid 90s, before that study, it was known that trauma had impact on your mental health, but they didn't really think that trauma had anything to do with medical conditions. So they did this checklist and they did this study with all of the other health conditions. And it really showed a strong link between medical events in later life and traumatic events in early life. And what they found was what they called dose-specific responses. So if you had a low ACE score, you had a relatively low risk of any of the conditions they studied, and 1 went up a little bit, 2 was like stair steps, 3, and then 4 came up quite a bit. If your score was 4 or higher, you are at least 10 times more likely to suffer from every single condition that they explored. And that list is pretty long. You can go to the CDC website if you want more specific information about them. There's a lot of information there. An ACE score of 6 or higher correlated with 20 years less life expectancy. So this was a pretty groundbreaking study and really promoted the looking at resilience. Like, wow, 20 years of loss of life is not acceptable, especially when you're looking at these are folks that had rough childhoods, right? They didn't get to enjoy childhood and now they're getting robbed of their adulthood. How can we help? What can we do to make this better? And that better is resilience. And that will be the second part of our talk after we finish looking at what the findings were from the ACEs. This is a newer slide from the CDC that looks at all the things that lead up to that 20-year less life expectancy. And it looks at the face of this trauma being what we all grow up in, our historical traumas, how it gets embedded in our bodies generation by generation. And for us as Americans, what we've got to look at is we are all here because we fled another country. You know, historically, we either fled or we were brought against our will to this country. So we all have some level of trauma embedded in our DNA, whether we were brought here as a slave, and have that trauma of being ripped from our foundations and our culture, or whether we were immigrants that came because of famine or political unrest, and had that leaving by choice, but still leaving our culture and what we were familiar with to come here. What happens when we then go into the next generation is some of that trauma it's epigenetic. So it doesn't change our DNA, but it changes the way our DNA is expressed. And it gets really complicated and deep. So I'm not a scientist, so I won't try to do all that. But it does have an impact. So even though I didn't personally immigrate here to escape unrest in a European country, my great-grandparents did. And so that stress was encoded epigenetically for my grandparents, and that got passed down. And so it may not be as strong or as much, but there's still some encoding of that trauma in me. And that then leads to social conditions that we experience. We have all of these traumatized people interacting together, trying to make things better. And then we have, you know, famines and droughts and difficulties that we experience in our social conditions that impact us. Then we have our individual adverse childhood experiences and what is going on in our homes that impact us directly, which then disrupts potentially our neurodevelopment and leads to those brains that don't have as many connections going on or have lots of nice connections on the good side of things. Social, emotional, cognitive impairment would come from that traumatic impact. And that will lead us to adopt health risk behaviors. If I have a lot of unhappiness and trauma, I'm more likely to experiment with substances because it changes the way I feel. It makes me feel better for a moment. That over time will lead, all that cortisol floating through my body will lead to disease, disability, social problems, and that then goes towards early death. So that's kind of the long-term impact of ACEs and how it impacts our health at every age. And this is you.
Some other facts of the ACEs, a person with a score of 4 or more adverse childhood experiences is 12.2 times as likely to attempt suicide, 10.3 times as likely to use injection drugs, and 7.4 times as likely to be an alcoholic. And some other outcomes for early adversity has lasting impacts include traumatic brain injury, fractures, burns, depression, anxiety, suicide, PTSD, unintended pregnancies, complications of fetal death, HIV, STDs, cancer, diabetes, the health concerns, alcohol and drug abuse, unsafe sex, those maladaptive behaviors, education, occupation, income, again, those community events, and those things that make it hard for you to go to school and be educated or get gainful employment. So here is some a video with core competencies.
Building core capabilities for life. Every day, we take on the ordinary, sometimes challenging tasks of work, school, parenting, relationships, and just managing our busy lives. How do we navigate these tasks successfully? And what can send us off course? Science offers an explanation. We all need a set of core capabilities that we can develop with practice over time. Scientists call them executive function or self-regulation skills, and they help us to focus on what's important, to plan ahead, set goals, and meet them. They help us deal with whatever life throws at us and still keep heading where we need to go. They help us resist impulsive behaviors. Stop. And change course when we need to. No one is born with executive function skills, but everyone can build them. We build them through a lifetime of making connections within and among the regions of the brain. Our brains begin life with billions of neurons, rapidly connecting to each other as we experience the world around us, making trillions of connections in just a few years. Early simple circuits form a foundation that more complex circuits and skills build on as we grow and have new experiences. These complex circuits, built throughout childhood and reaching across vast regions of the brain, make our core capabilities possible. The more we use these connections, the stronger and faster they become. That's why practice is so important. When we are children, we practice these skills by playing games, learning teamwork, adjusting to new rules. We continue to develop these skills in adolescence by managing school and other things like work, sports, music, and relationships. When we practice executive function skills, circuits rapidly connect the prefrontal cortex to other parts of the brain. These circuits act like an air traffic control system in the brain. They manage incoming information and help us respond with intention, not on impulse. Threatening or stressful experiences activate different circuits, and those trigger automatic responses: fight, flight, or freeze. We need automatic responses for survival, but if stress is constant, these automatic fight or flight circuits become stronger and faster than our more productive intentional circuits, the ones we use for executive function and self-regulation. For anyone under stress, it's hard to call on intentional skills. If we've been experiencing serious stress from our earliest years, the stress caused by poverty, violence, or addiction, a chaotic environment, it's even harder. Under lots of stress every day, it's harder still. The key is counterbalancing those automatic responses by building up our intentional ones, by building strong executive function skills. The good news is these core capabilities can be strengthened. How? By redesigning our systems so they reduce the sources of stress in people's lives, by simplifying how services are provided to families, helping them meet basic needs and building on strengths, because small successes lead to bigger ones. With less stress, we can practice the skills we already have and build new circuits for the intentional responses we need. Stronger brain circuits are built through practice in situations that matter. That's true for children, it's true for adolescents, and it's true for adults. Helping children build skills gives them a strong foundation for all that comes later. Helping teens build their skills propels them into greater success as adults and parents. And helping adult caregivers build their core capabilities ensures success at work, stable homes, and responsive relationships for the next generation. When our communities work together to help children and adults build these skills, we create a positive cycle as one generation passes them on to the next. And that helps us all. building court.
All right. Turning now to looking at resilience. Everyone is affected by trauma, as we talked about earlier. The statistic was 7 out of 10 Americans have faced at least one traumatic event, but post-pandemic, we've all faced a traumatic event, whether or not we've have been traumatized by it is different for each person. Some other statistics include 1 out of 3 women and more than 1 in 4 men have experienced rape, physical violence, and or stalking by an intimate partner, as that's an adult. Nearly 80% of female offenders with a mental illness report having been physically or sexually abused. And those are some really old statistics now. The majority of clients served by public mental health and substance abuse service systems are survivor of trauma. And I think that's like 90%. 75% of women and men in treatment for substance use disorder report traumatic histories.
Impact of trauma. So the after effect of trauma can look like a lot of things. So it could be physical, which could be chronic pain, headaches, heart disease, diabetes, autoimmune disorders. Mental, which could be decreased concentration, poor memory, difficulty assessing reasoning and logic. Emotional, disassociation, depression, anxiety, panic attacks, having anger outbursts, adult temper tantrums. Social can be isolation, feeling like an exile, poor boundaries, feeling separate or different, and also experiencing or feeling shame. Spiritual could be struggle with your faith, pulling away from your normal faith-based activities, feeling judged or disregarded. So those are just some of the effects of trauma. Here are some more effects of trauma. So hypervigilance, a constant state of arousal, feeling scared, numbing or avoidance, wears a person down, exhaustion, fatigue, physical, mental, emotional problems, difficulty with relationships, having a hard time communicating well, sleep problems, experiencing flashbacks, extremes, ups and downs in emotions, feeling abandoned, hopelessness, helplessness, experiencing guilt, shame, freezing, anger, violence, or runaway. These are some other effects of trauma that can be immediate or they can come over time, years or decades.
All right, so turning to how can we help if we know someone who has experienced some traumatic events, what can we do to help? SAMHSA offers us the 4 R's. We want to realize the widespread impact of trauma. We want to recognize the signs and symptoms of trauma in others. We want to respond with fully integrated policies, procedures, and practices, and actively resist re-traumatization, which means making sure that we're acting in ways that aren't going to traumatize people again or intentionally activate their trauma response. So we're going to look at some helpful things to say, because as this little quote says, you never know when one act or one word of encouragement will change a life forever. Some of the things that are going to pop on the screen are things that I've learned over my lifetime as the last 20 years as a therapist, and some are things that were suggested by trauma survivors directly. So the first one is this is more for something to use if somebody is in the middle of a flashback and is feeling very disconnected from the here and now, is reminding them that it's not happening now, that the trauma is over, it's in the past, and that you are here in the present. You are safe. The adults here are responsible for your safety, and you are worthy of care and protection. And of course, these can be changed depending on your situation. The adults here are responsible is more of something that might be said in a treatment setting. But if you're, you know, at home, it's just, you're safe. I'm here with you. I'm protecting you, and you are worthy of care and protection. You are not inherently dangerous or toxic. What is inside you, your thoughts, feelings, dreams, cannot hurt others or yourself. And that one comes from a lot of times folks that are dealing with trauma are so hurt by their memories themselves that they're afraid that sharing is going to hurt the people that are hearing it. They're also feeling like there's something wrong with them that caused the horrible thing to happen to start with. And they're afraid that they're going to then damage others that are in their vicinity. So kind of reassuring them that those things are not true. You are good. Whatever you have experienced and whatever you have had to do to survive, you are a good, strong person who can contribute to your community. Just in validating that inherent worth. And you have a future. Trauma robs us of the ability to foresee a positive future. So just reminding folks that they do indeed have a future, and they have the ability to make it a positive future.
So respond to the need, not the behavior. So also to know that all behavior is communication. So you see the first child is survival brain safety. The middle is emotional brain connection. And the last one is thinking brain teaching. So with the survival brain, it's like fight or flight. So what the brain needs, and the hierarchy needs come in there. The emotional brain is time in, or time out to listen. So time in to see what is going on, and the time out to listen it. And then the thinking brain is the teaching, which is where you can repair and reconnect.
So the important thing here too is to remember that you can't correct a child or an adult for that matter. You can't correct someone who is in emotional distress, who's flipped their lid. If they are dysregulated, they have to be regulated first before you can talk to them on the thinking level. So you're going to work on safety, like, I need you to come inside. I need you to come away from the road. It's going to be very short and directive. And then it's going to be connection. You're okay. I want to help. Let's talk more. I'm listening, before you get into the thinking brain. What can we do different next time so that we don't have to get so upset, or so that it doesn't have negative impacts, you know, like we don't destroy things that are important to others or to yourself. So you want to work up that chain: safety, connection, teaching, and help the person get regulated.
Responding to the downstairs brain. So stay regulated. Can't co-regulate it when dysregulated. Meet the need. Behavior is communication. Connect before you correct. Acknowledge the feelings. Use a calm and caring voice. Remove threats and triggers. So minimize talking. Executive function is impaired. Use distractions. Do something fun. Do something unexpected. It did sensory input. So like it has a piece of chewing gum, get some weighted blankets, some fidgets, some cold water, maybe a cold towel, some popsicles, things for some sensory input.
So I would just kind of point out on this slide that the important thing is this first one: stay regulated. If you're dealing with someone who's dysregulated and you panic, then we now have two issues instead of one. So your first thing is to stay calm and address the situation the best you can. Knowing, of course, if you stay calm, then you got your thinking brain on point, and that's where you want to be. You don't want to be trying to deal with something in a dysregulated state yourself. Some of the ways that you can work towards regulating. The first is breath work. That's the fastest way to get your parasympathetic back to rest and digest, calm things down. Also, the fastest way to rev things up if you need to get more awake and aroused and alert. Breathing out twice as long as you breathe in will calm things down. So even doing something as simple as pretending you're blowing out through a straw will lengthen that breath and it will bring you back down. On the other hand, if you're like driving and you're on a long road trip and you're starting to get a little drowsy, breathing out twice as fast as you breathe in will elevate you. It'll bring you to a more aroused state. It might wake you up just long enough to get to that rest stop, to get out and move around, get your blood flowing. Movement, active for upregulating. You want to be running or jumping jacks, being more active, and slow for downregulating. Yoga, Tai Chi, rhythmic movements. You want to use sensory awareness. Frozen oranges are good because you can toss that into your freezer. It's there whenever you need it. It has that little bumpy texture, so you get the texture, you can pick at it. It's got the scent, the orange. The frozen part is a tactile, like jump to your senses. You can put it on the back of your neck too to prevent the faint response. So frozen oranges or citrus, doesn't have to be an orange. Any citrus will do because it's got all of the smell and the texture and the cold. Ice packs, sour candy, squishy toys, fidgets are all great for just grounding and keeping you in the here and now. Mindfulness practices, noticing how you feel, observing the world around you, also very good for regulating.
Key principles of trauma-informed care include voice and choice, safety, trustworthiness and transparency, empowerment, collaborative and mutuality, and peer support. So with voice and choice, it's the organization aims to strengthen choice and recognize that every person's experience is unique and requires an individualized approach. Safety. Throughout the organization, staff and the people they serve feel physically and psychologically safe. The physical setting is a safe place and the interpersonal interactions promote a sense of safety, trustworthiness, and transparency. Organizational operations and decisions are conducted with transparency and the goal of building and maintaining trust among staff, service users, family members, and people being served by the organization. Empowerment. Throughout the organization and among people served, individual strengths are recognized and validated, and new skills developed as necessary. Collaborations and mutuality. There's a true partnering and level of power differences between staff and people using services. And among organizational staff, from direct care staff to administrators, there's recognition that healing happens in relationships and that meaningful sharing of power decision maker. Provide peer support. The organization recognizes the importance of lived experiences and fosters connection.
Some other qualities of trauma-informed care involve services that strive to reduce or eliminate any interventions that can re-traumatize people or cause a first-time trauma. We definitely don't want to be traumatic in how we interact with folks. Services that deal directly with the impact of trauma, which is what we focus on here at Robin's Hope, and we'll share a little bit more on that in a minute. Services that recognize that many of the behaviors that were once viewed as symptoms of illness are actually a person's best attempt to cope with and adapt to trauma. And that a service that practices universal precautions, it doesn't hurt to treat everyone well, right? If we just assume everyone has experienced trauma, one, we're accurate, and two, it's not going to hurt someone who hasn't been traumatized to be treated well. And it will very much help the person who has been traumatized. Services that are aware that punishing misbehavior is akin to piling on even more trauma, right? If we go back to that predictive brain model, if I've been abused, then I'm much more sensitive to seeing sensory input as threatening. So if you think about, yes, if you've raised a child in a healthy, happy home and they get a spanking on the behind, that's not a traumatic experience. But if I've been abused and I see you draw back your hand to hit my behind, I'm going to experience that as a threat, and that is going to be traumatic. which is why foster care agencies do not allow their foster parents to use corporal punishment on the children in their care. Services that shift focus from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. Understanding that everybody is doing their best to cope with the world around them. So what looks like abnormal behavior is being done for an adaptive purpose. And if we get curious, we can figure out what that is.
So the personal bill of rights, I will not read all of them. I'll read the first three, but these also, everyone has the right to this. You can go online and you can look it up. The author is unknown. So the first one is, I have the right to ask for what I want. I have the right to say no to requests on demands I cannot meet. And I'll read the third one. I have the right to express all my feelings, positive or negative. And resilience, what is it and how is it built? So resilience, the courage to come back. Now we will move into talking about resilience and how we build it.
So 2 definitions of resilience. The first comes from the dictionary, and there we learn that it is an ability to recover from or adjust easily to misfortune or change. For us, we use content from the Community Resilience Initiative, and they define resilience as skills that can be taught that allow us to absorb stress better or recover from stress more quickly. And I really like that resilience is boiled down to skills that can be taught, right? Because I think initially, before a whole lot of research was done, we talk about resilient people that were able to overcome their trauma as if it was something that was inbuilt. So if we weren't born resilient, we were kind of destined to be damaged by the world around us. But this really shows that we can learn. There's skills that we can learn that make us more resilient. And certainly we come into life with the experiences that we've had, that some of that is going to build resilience in us as well.
So recovering from trauma, the role of resilience. Resilience is the ability to overcome adversity. People who are resilient see themselves as safe, capable, and lovable. Factors that increase resilience include a strong relationship with at least one competent, caring adult, having talents, abilities nurtured and appreciated, having a sense of belonging to a community, group of cause, and feeling some control over one's life and competence. Resilient people immediately look at the problem and say, what is the solution to that? What is it trying to teach me? And I feel, yeah.
So when we're looking at building resilient communities, we're looking at what they call the virtuous cycle. And that is that in order to break the impact of ACEs in the next generation, right? We talked about that historical trauma gets passed on through the epigenetic changes in your DNA. If we can intervene with the adults to help them build more resilient skills, then they are going to teach their children to be more resilient, and they're going to enter the world with less ACEs. Then with those less ACEs, then when they have children, they are healthier, and they're going to then give more resilience to their children, and so on and so on. So we start building that positive cycle. And it's a community effort. The healthier our whole community becomes, the healthier the individuals in that community become. And the more resilience, right? Those connections with one supportive other. That's the strongest resilience factor. And that can come from the home, but it can also come from the school. It can come from the community, the church, the faith group. Like, we find resilience factors in people that believe in us everywhere. The more that we have healthy communities to have those people involved, the better off our next generations will be. This quote came from a training that I happened to go to one day, and it was just so powerful. I needed to put it in here. Connection, right? That one of those resilience skills. Connection creates hope, and hope saves lives. And that's really important when we're looking at why is it important to build resilience. It's because the impact of traumatic events can cause depression, suicidal thinking, disconnection from others. We need to create that connection, to create that hope, and to have that hope save lives.
So this next video is a video that shows challenging situations and the importance of building community resilience.
And that, so I'll go back for a sec. This link brings you to a game that is interactive. We'll watch the intro video, but you can go on and explore the game yourself if you would like. It's kind of fun.
In this interactive, you will learn how the choices we make can help children and the community become more resilient in the face of serious challenges. Negative events can occur at any moment, and it's your job to choose positive events to counteract these negatives. Choose carefully. You only have 20 resilience bucks to spend, and certain positives will better counteract certain negatives and have a greater positive effect on children in the community. Your goal is to tip as many children's scales as possible toward positive outcomes. Clicking on a child's scale will give you a more detailed look at their history, scale, and fulcrum. The positive experiences you choose will alter both the scale and the position of the fulcrum, shaping the outcomes of children and the community. We all face adversity in life, but will your community thrive or dive? It depends on the choices we make. In this
All right, so what can we do to build relationships? So one of the things we do here at Robin's Hope is we run groups that are specifically focused on building resilience. And to do that, we use this card deck that is pictured, which comes from the Community Resilience Initiative, the Resilience Trumps ACEs card deck. And we'll show you a little bit more. It has 42 resilience skills in there, and then the 10 ACEs that are represented in that the list that we did before. And you'll see the resilience skills in the next couple of slides. But the things that we can do as individuals to build resilience are to build those strong relationships, connect. With this day of screens everywhere, that becomes more challenging, but connecting, having those relationships with people. Nurturing talents and abilities, your own and others, building a sense of belonging to a community, a group, or a cause, and building competence, feeling some control over one's life. So recognizing the choices you make, empowering your children to have choices, even if those are modified, right? So you might have a choice on whether you want a hot dog or a hamburger, but you don't have a choice on whether you eat just junk, right? But you can give some choice, even though it's modified.
So
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
here are some individual resilience skills. So learning to accept help, learning to ask for help, accepting ownership for my behavior, mastering a skill, developing self-esteem, developing hope. I get joy when I see that someone else has like a glimmer of hope. It makes me feel that I also can have that too. Experiencing success, sharing something important, centering triggers that create negative behavior, practicing self-discipline, and developing the ability to calm oneself. So that maybe could be, maybe touching your hand, kind of rubbing on your arm. So doing different things to help calm yourself. And it's really good when you see other people doing that. And there's other things that you can adapt to helping you also learn those things. Relationship resilience, verbally saying I love you, expressing emotions, helping a friend, giving back to the community are some of those.
Sorry,
That's okay.
trying to move this out of the way of the words. Okay.
Acknowledging when I am wrong, feeling empowered to ask questions and to share my ideas. Those are just some of the relationship resilience skills.
And this is an example of some community resilience. These are things that just me in this slide. Here we go. These are some things that Chesterfield County's Suicide Awareness and Prevention Coalition did during COVID to reach out to the community. It came together with that whole coalition and the WISE YMCA's, and the libraries. And the first thing they did was they did Rocks of Hope, where they gave little rocks and some paints and markers, and they left them at the libraries for people to pick up and paint their own rocks and give an encouraging message, and then they would place them back in the community so that other people would find them and see them and have a brighter day because of that. Seeds of Hope, they have little packets with an inspiring message, and you could plant the wildflower seeds to have an ongoing reminder that the community cared for you, and it, makes the whole world prettier. And then Trees of Hope, they cut out these little hands and they would write the inspiring messages on there, and they would create trees in each of the county libraries so that people going in for books could see all these reminders that they are cared about and part of the fabric of community while we were in lockdown and people couldn't have those direct communications. So there's examples of the ways the community can step in and be part of that resilience building for everyone.
So creating a sense of belonging, protect the ability to choose, be supportive, being specific when confronting, allowing for differences, have fun, be genuine, minimize power differentials, listen, be open to learning.
And these are the things that we reflected on when we looked at how did Robin's Hope create a community that works, where people feel like some of the things that they tell us on an ongoing basis are, this is my safe place. I look forward to coming here. I heard 2 people yesterday. I come here just for the hugs. Being able to kind of look at what makes a group become more than just a collection of bodies and become a place that feels supportive and energizing and special. And these are the kinds of things that we came up with when we were reflecting on that. Creating positive change, kind of reflecting on, for me, the process in getting Robin's Hope up and started and continuing to grow. And what's been helped, it's been very successful. We've grown like a weed. We're barely 6 years old and we just keep growing, which is wonderful. And that started for me with finding a passion, realizing that we needed a place for people to feel like they felt safe and belonged in order to do the trauma healing, because I couldn't do that individually in a session for folks. I could get them part of the way, but I couldn't get them all of the way to feeling healed. Define the cause. So defining what was needed, a place to develop peer support where they could talk to other people who had that lived experience, or where you could have peer specialists who were specially trained to use their lived experience to help people. Define the cause. Let's heal some trauma. Let's build some resilience. Collaborate with others. Let's meet all of the people in the community that want to volunteer or participate. And peers coming alongside clinicians to make this thing be as strong as it can be and being able to achieve healing. Celebrate the small wins. It's super exciting that first day when we had 3 people walk in the door. Yay, we have a group, we have an idea. And now, I had 10 people in my group last night, which was amazing. There's always small wins. There's always somebody that's doing better, that's taking their next step in their healing that you can celebrate. Value your team. Everybody has a role. And we wouldn't be the same if there were different people. So always being able to value the people that are around. Have patience. Some days are more challenging than others, and there's always some new wrinkle that you don't see coming. Don't give up. It can get tough. There are things that make you wonder how long you can push through. But then you have to dip back into your passion. Why am I doing this? Why is this important? To find my cause again. This is what we're all about. And you just keep going through. And it's worked for us 6 years in. So that's my thoughts on that. So Robin's Hope, our contact information is here. I was there. There it is again. We are a voluntary program for adults 18 and over. We offer groups in person and online. In person, we're here Monday, Wednesdays, Fridays currently. And online, we are active 7 days a week. You can go to our website at robinshope.com or robinshope.org and check out on our group page. We have calendars that show which groups are active and when they are meeting. If you are interested in any of them, you can click the button to register. It's a quick, just give us your name, and then you can hop in. There's no paperwork to do. There's no long introductions. You can come on in, meet the folks, and see what's of interest to you. You can come once and never come again. You can come all day, every day. You can do whatever works for you. We believe that each person is an expert in themselves and they know what they best need to heal. So there's no commitments. There's no cost to attend. We exist through donations and community support so that everybody that needs healing can feel free to come without finances being an anxiety producing thing for them. So that's us. Feel free to reach out, and thank you so much for your time.
Have a good one.